Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to the Metropolis Forum's webinar on New Tech for Architecture and Design. I'm Rajagopal, the editor-in-chief of Metropolis magazine. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's interesting that we've all gotten so used to doing this kind of norming, sharing the rules, right? Every time we plunge into a new piece of technology, we've gotten so used to this with Zoom, with Teams, or whatever other program that all of you are using to get your work done day in and day out. At the very start of this, work from home period that we're going through right now, Metropolis reached out to a few architects and designers. Among them was a construction manager, and he was complaining that he didn't even have space on at his home to roll out the drawings that he usually works with. So, as we're talking about technology today for architecture and design, I think it's just a reminder that there are many processes in the architecture and design practice that still rely on tangible physical tools. There are many ways in which our ways of thinking are still tied to the tools that we're used to, and working with new tools is a process of adaptation. So there's video conferencing software, of course, that we're all using today, workflow management tools, BIM plugins, of all kinds of VR, AR, all kinds of new technologies that are coming into architecture and design practice. And certainly some of that adoption seems to be set to accelerate thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. So how are architecture and design firms adapting their technology strategies, and what do they have their eye on for the future? To help us answer, we are very, very thrilled to have with us three amazing speakers, all great thinkers and practitioners, especially at the intersection of technology and architecture and design practice. Rob DeMillo, who is Chief Technology Officer at SOM. Thanks so much for joining us, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Don Weinreich, who is a partner at Ennead Architects. Hi, Don. Thank you for joining us. And Michael Beneville, who's the founder and CEO of Beneville Studios, and also the Chief Creative Officer at Area 15. And we'll talk about Area 15 in just a little bit. Hi, Michael.
Pleasure to be with all of you.
So, Rob, I'd like to kick it off with you. You came to SOM a few months ago, but before that, you worked on space exploration, on weather systems, on entertainment, media, and also you were very engaged with cloud-based platforms, most recently in the animation industry, which seems very apt for this time. We're all using some kind of cloud-based software at this point to keep work going with our colleagues. How are you bringing that expertise to SOM, and why do you think it's important for the firm, but also for architects and designers?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've been at SOM now for a little over a year. I came here, as you pointed out, from the animation industry, and my career's been an interesting rocket ship ride. So I started out in space flight and later with the FAA, and then moved from there to entrepreneurial work. But the entrepreneurial work was always around large scale issues and projects. So heavy mathematics, a lot of load on the systems, a lot of heavy computer graphics. So I stayed with that theme for many, many decades and followed it as we went from sort of large mainframes to smaller workstations to PCs to phones and tablets, and then back up the chain again to the point where we're now utilizing cloud service technologies that you couldn't have imagined years ago. And what was striking to me was when I was at Nimble Collective, which was the animation company I was at prior to coming to SOM, was the problem set was very similar. It was the same sort of mindset with the people that were using the animation software, very talented people, very artistic and design oriented, but also heavy into math and heavy into manipulation of heavyweight objects on screen. We founded that company with the idea of taking that idea of a studio where you had several hundred people working on an animated film and getting rid of the equipment and moving the whole thing into the cloud. We were successful in doing that. During that exploration, I got very, very interested in the AEC community and architecture in general, and coming to SOM was just a natural thing to do?
That's really interesting. In architecture firms, we know it takes a village to, get a project done. And there's so many parallels to the animation industry. So many hands touch a single project, and you're dealing with, high fidelity, high quality information and data that needs to be transferred seamlessly from hand to hand. And that's very true of architecture as well. So, I think it's really interesting how we might look at a future where architecture firms can do the same thing, right? Move a lot of their technology infrastructure to the cloud and be able to rely on that. Don, I'd love to bring you in here. That kind of, transformation in practice, right? Going to cloud computing. I mean, I remember, when BIM had such a, big sort of adoption curve, let's say, within the architecture and design field, and ENIAD actually was at the forefront of that. You've seen many technology shifts in architecture practice. How do you see processes at ENIAD changing today, and what role does technology play in that?
Sure. That's a great question, and one probably with no answer, but let's at least explore it a little bit. I mean, I'm in thinking about today's topic, there are really three basic areas that I think are interesting to explore. One is the impact of the current situation that we're all in on community and culture. I'm talking about the community and culture of a professional practice. In our case, we have about 220 people, some in New York, some in Shanghai, and how is our culture affected? Another one which has a bit to do with cloud, but is one that's very much on my mind, is this challenge of data sprawl. I'll come back to in a minute. And then I think that the last one, and perhaps the most challenging, is what will this autumn look like when we start returning to our offices in phase, or maybe it happens this summer, or wherever our audience is. It may happen sooner or later, depending. But just to kind of pick away at each of those for a moment, the impact of work from home, kind of extended and mandated work from home on the culture, has been, I wouldn't say it's a presumption, but one can assume that everyone is available all the time. Whenever you need someone, you hit a button and there they are. Now, that might not be the most appropriate time to contact someone. So this has been strangely disruptive to the work-life balance, even though our staff are all at home, but their lives have been disrupted. So we actually built a tool to help with that, to kind of stimulate the experience of being in the office to some degree. So every day we all check in online, and you do it, there's a web interface. You check in, you identify yourself, are you working today or not? You can leave a little message for people, and the dot that represents your seat in the office changes color to say, okay, I'm in. And there's this kind of wonderful experience that I have every morning when I go to work early. So at 7:30 or 8, and I can see that the office kind of light up with people. And that to me is a signal when it's okay to contact somebody. So there's both the spatial memory of where we all work, our work home, and then this kind of this passive sense of awareness of your colleagues that you also get in an office. So that's been very good. Managing workflow has also been a really big challenge. You can't just lean over to somebody and say, okay, ready to give this to you. So we've built some virtual workflow monitoring tools so that people can have an awareness of when something is ready for them to receive, and they can signal to others that it's ready for a handoff. And it can be bi-directional, because we don't really work in a linear way. I think, as far as looking forward, the big challenge, I think, is going to be, right now, we can all have this rather intimate experience, albeit virtually. We can collaborate. I can get closer to 6 feet from any of you, and we could share a document or look at a drawing together. But if we're in the office but have to stay socially distant, how can we really collaborate where proximity of less than 6 feet is kind of important. And what will it be like when some people are out of the office and some people are in the office? Will there be 50 simultaneous web meetings going on all the time with a lot of crosstalk and chatter driving each other crazy? And the data sprawl thing also, I think that a lot of these platforms really enable and encourage a very rapid transfer and sharing of information. But where is your data? Are you meeting all the compliance rules for safeguarding it? It is really essential. And then the last thing I'll just mention, which is interesting about these communication platforms, which actually are quite good, but they lack something that a telephone has, which is duplex audio. So we've all been in those situations where there's that kind of awkward pause, two people start speaking at once, and then they both stop, and no one quite knows who to go next. So duplex audio would be a great enhancement.
Thanks so much for that, Tom. That's like such a great wide sweep across different technologies. There's lots of pieces in there that I'd love to return to, or that I'm sure the audience is going to kind of pick up with you. Just a couple of points to emphasize. The one is, I think it's really interesting talking about, finding that technology fit that works for your office culture. I love that idea of the web interface that tells you when people are in the office. My own team does that by, saying hi and good morning every time they sign on in the morning, but we're a small enough team that works. And I think it just indicates that people are available, and it prevents that leach into their personal lives. But also, this kind of norming or rule forming around, workflow, right? Moving files from one person to the other, trying to replicate that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in Zoom calls where coworkers have said, let's keep doing calls like this, even if we're all back in the office, right? There's something we find quite charming about, being able to share a screen and live in virtual space together, because so much of our work happens in the virtual sphere anyway. Before we move on to Michael, again, I just want to remind everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. We're here talking about new technology in architecture and design with Michael Beneville of Beneville Studios, Don Weinreich of Ennead Architects, and Rob DeMillo of SOM. Michael, I'd love to bring you in here. Don talked about this really amazing thing that they've done, very sweet, of being respectful to each other in the office, seeing when everybody's in the office and so on. You had gone one step further even before this COVID-19 crisis hit. Your office, Beneville Studios, was working on a full digital twin of your office, a sort of VR replica of your office, even before the crisis hit. Why were you doing that? Also, it seems to me that, with Area 15, which is this 250,000 square foot event space in Vegas that you're working on, you're looking at, a digital twin or at least a twinned digital experience to that physical space as well. Tell us about both of those projects, creating the VR experience of your office as well as Area 15, and how that has developed in recent weeks.
Well, at the risk of being or sounding too sci-fi, and I think 6 or 7 weeks ago, a lot of this stuff sounded like gobbledygook to most of the world, and there's been a huge accelerator and adoption of this virtual world. And we're in a virtual world right now, even in a Zoom. There's so many levels of worlds. I think that it stems from my interest in the fact that I fundamentally believe that humanity not will, but already has opened up a fissure into a parallel dimension. And we are uploading, every single thing that we that we hold dear into it, and a lot of it's junk, but a lot of it is actually meaningful. My interest in all of this really stems from, I think, probably my work over the last few decades. I have a studio in New York City that services clients around the world, but primarily in the U.S. And we call ourselves an idea manifestation machine. So an idea manifestation machine is a machine. It's a small team of ninjas that take an idea, come up with an idea, run with an idea, do all of these things. But we don't just sort of think it out and leave people with a list of here's some good things to think about. We often execute the project as well. So if it's within the skill set of the team or it can be done at that scale, we'll do that in-house. But more often than not, we are engaged and plugged into, you know, teams of thousands. I am not an architect. I'm not officially a designer. I don't really know what I am. I'm an artist of some sort or another that runs an idea manifestation machine. That's what I do. And so we come into contact with all of the architects and all the trades and all these different people that are, you know, part of what we do. So we're agnostic to medium also, meaning that at any given point in time, we're creating a book, we're making a machine, some sort of clock that tells the story of a family's life or something like that. And then on beyond that, we're creating something like Area 15, which is this complex in Las Vegas, or we're the chief creative consultants for iHeartMedia. So we oversee, we just design their headquarters, but we also oversee 5 million square feet of their real estate as they convert it into the 21st century. And we do that with, you know, incredible architecture firms, A+I being one of them. So to answer your question, it actually goes back to an iHeart revelation I had 7 or 8 years ago when we were designing the headquarters for Bob Pittman and for what was at the time Clear Channel is now iHeart. Was we were designing the whole place in SketchUp with A+I, and it occurred to me that it really just felt an awful like a video game, and I realized that we had actually built the project before ever having swung a hammer. And it made me feel at the time, and I remember expressing it to Pittman and others at the time, just, you know, you realize that we have a vast office here. We're not limited to the 75,000 square feet of this place. We have millions of square feet, and all we need to do is to generate more and more from the model. The project's already done. And so that was where it sort of tweaked. And then I started to feel very much that that in our work, some of the tools that we use are ancient. They haven't fundamentally changed in 1,000 years, and some of the things are brand new. The VR piece of it became something where we thought we must understand how VR impacts us as a medium and how we're going to convert the files and the data and all of these stories into something that is compelling for the next generation. I don't believe, I'll kind of close on this, that any technology replaces another one completely. In fact, they all just sort of fall into the quiver of arrows of what you need for the use case. So I imagine that in the next 2 to 10 years or whatever, the glasses won't just be one thing or another. They will allow me to see reality this way, see reality this way, augment my reality, FaceTime my reality or whatever. And if I want to go deeper, blank out my reality and plunge into a VR reality. And I'll toggle between those same things the way that I do through the telephone and the, you know, FaceTime today, and when I want to go deeper. So we fell into that world and got, you know, a good friend of mine is a guy named Philip Rosedale who invented Life, which is an incredible online world. Mm-hmm. He was working on a virtual reality version of that called High Fidelity. He has pivoted into something which, Don, I think you'll really appreciate if you haven't been in there yet, but it is full duplex audio. It's, you know, 100 people clapping their hands and nothing is lost. So I'm an advisor to that project, to High Fidelity. And then with a group called Tivoli, we built this virtual version of the studio. And the last thing I'll say is that I believe that when you create a world that is a facsimile of a real world that you've been in, your connection to it is deeper. It's more palpable. I walk through this space and I have memories. And I don't have memories of this virtual space. I have memories of the physical space that I've acquired over the last 7 or 8 years of being in that physical space. And during this COVID, I've been on the West Coast. But to be able to walk through my studio, see my team, see my dog, Oliver, in the corner, and be able to invite clients in and to have a boundless world of screens, it's still, unfortunately, the world of VR is still an ivory tower. We have to break down the barriers of that and put headsets into people's hands. But yeah, that's why I did it.
Again, there's lots of themes in there, I think, that connect with what all three of you had said. We're here talking about new technology in architecture and design with Rob DeMillo from SOM, Don Weinreich from Ennead Architects, and Michael Beneville of Beneville Studios. And I think one of the themes that's emerged here is really, the connections between the physical work process and physical expression, physical memory, and technology that's for the most part digital. Whether it's looking at having a lot of our work product going to the cloud, whether it's about replacing face-to-face interaction with video conferencing type interaction, whether it's taking our memories of physical space into a VR model. And our first question here from the audience actually kind of connects to that. One of our attendees is asking, I'm curious about Don's comment about duplex audio, which Michael just referenced as well, and the stop-start pattern of most current communication conference call technologies. It's difficult to replicate the collaboration of a shared physical conference room. Do you see other technologies in the horizon that will help rectify that? Don, I'll let you come in on that, but I would just like to expand that to, sort of those little moments of, entropy, like loss of quality that we still experience when we go into, a digital workspace or life space, and what are some of those sort of slippages and how do we address them? But Don, I'll let you come in on the duplex audio thing.
Yeah, I don't have any specific answers. I think Michael is probably the right person to talk about that. But what Michael was saying actually made two words kind of stick in my mind. This notion of fidelity, which if you think of the definition of the word, it's about truthfulness, but it's also about richness and kind of complexity. So having high fidelity interactions with people is definitely a challenge in the current circumstance. A lot of fidelity is lost. Like, I can't tell if Rob's foot is tapping because he's getting bored listening to me. If I was in the room with him, I might notice that and adjust. The issue of memory is also a really interesting one. And then there's this other category of people right now. I don't remember exactly how many. I think there might be 5 people who have joined Ennead after we all left the office. They have no memory. Their only knowledge of it is this weird circumstance. And what will it be like for them to meet us one day at home? So if we have, I guess our check-in app is a very crude version of Michael's virtual office. It gives you something to latch onto that has a kind of physicality. But other ways of improving the fidelity and interaction, I think we're still using the tools that we have sort of crudely, and they're a bit disjunctive. Like even right now, we can talk, we can see each other, we have some notion of what the audience might be thinking because they're engaging with us. We're actually starting to use surveys of our staff to understand their state of mind, their situations, which will help us plan, how to improve the office generally and how to plan for the return to work. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but that's what I was thinking.
Oops.
No, please.
Yeah, there's a number of startups that are working on the fidelity problem for audio. I mean, getting full duplex over VoIP is a difficult thing to do, as you all know, because it's not a broadcast mechanism. It's sort of everyone gets a packet at a different point in time. But there are a lot of people that are trying to tackle the problem. For me, the issue seems to be more of an uncanny valley. There's something wrong with this, right? And you can't quite put your finger on it, but the interaction with other people is just slightly off. And I think a lot of it causes video conferencing fatigue, just because you're repetitively going from environment to environment to environment. But you do adapt to it. Michael, when you don the VR helmet, you have to adapt to that, right? I mean, you're in a world that's very de-resed compared to what you're experiencing in the real world, and it's off-putting for 20-30 minutes, but then your brain adapts to it and you kind of move forward from there. Something very similar, I think, is happening in this this world we've entered into. Before the COVID crisis, I was my team was working on consolidating all of our software that we were using for doing collaborative efforts. And so it was just kind of coincidental that it hit at the point in time that it did. But we've gone down to video conferencing and Slack, and you know, I see questions in the chat about whiteboard applications. We're experimenting with those as well. But so just kind of bringing people into these single points of contact for different type of communications channels is helping. But yeah, Don's point, there's something quite off about communicating.
I think, Rob, if I may, I totally agree with you. And that uncanny valley is absolutely that's the holy grail right now, is how to crack the code on it. I also, you know, I think we all believe that being in person is absolutely a critical way of bonding and forming a team, if it's possible. I know that it will not be possible for my studio to continue to do its work if I am virtual the entire time. We have a shorthand, and we're able to communicate in this environment and to be so effective because we've had 15 years of working together, and we know each other's social cues, and we know each other's, we can sense these tiny little things. I also believe that the nuance of sound and spatial audio and spatialness is very important. And that's actually a limitation, you know, oh gods of Zoom, I know you're listening, but it's a limitation to what we're experiencing right now, which is that we don't have a sense of the room or where everybody is in it, or hearing sound in our different ears. And it's not possible to break into the conversation or chat with the person next to us without bothering the, you know, the conference or the speakers and things like that, which is one of the things that has fascinated me about the rich landscapes of VR, and then also the high fidelity. Don, I think you'll be fascinated, and it's free right now. You just go to, you know, highfidelity.com, spin up a server, and suddenly you are in a space where you might just be a dot, but you're a dot with 10 or 15, or we've had up to, you know, 100, 200 people in there at any given point in time. And where you are is where you are as a dot. But you can hear the sound, and you can move, and you can go to different areas and places. And because you can drop a floor plan in underneath it, you're really walking through an office. And it starts to mimic something really interesting. When we've set maps that are familiar to us, the whole group understands what to do. And you can break into a conversation that's happening, and it's really interesting that you literally turn your little avatar towards it and back and forth. We're social creatures, and we need to be in person. You were asking, Avi, about Area 15. The reason that I think that it's such an interesting project and why we created it is I fundamentally believe that people want to be together physically and digitally at the very same time. And we're already seeing the hack together versions of that, because we're walking around with our phones and texting each other while we're in the same, I mean, we've all had the experience of not getting up to go to the next room and just texting somebody who's literally, you know, 100 feet away, because we want to be space and also digitally connected. So this is not to replace anything. It's to add this extra layer of hopefully flexibility and ease, and maybe some sort of environmental impact of us traveling a little less.
You know, the issue of asynchronicity is really, it's still not been overcome. So if you ever want to try an interesting experiment during a Zoom call, try closing your eyes and just listening to people speak, and suddenly much easier to understand them because they're not out of sync with their video. It's true.
As you heighten the senses.
We all had that eerie experience of driving in a car while talking on a cell phone, hands-free, of course, and just finding it to be a very, very unsettling experience. Like your mind really struggles to be in two places at once and to kind of patch these things together when information isn't synced.
So what's interesting to me is I'm here. I'll confess in front of all these people. I'm a gamer, and so several times a week, or a couple times a week at least, I'll hop on a multiplayer game, and it's immersive. You're on with 20, 30 other people, several hundred other people in some cases. You very quickly adapt. Right. And I have friends that I play with all the time. They're on the same teams and squads that I'm on, and you get very used to sort of turning to face the avatar, as Michael said, and the barrier kind of goes away. And I bring it up for a reason, because what's interesting about it is I don't have that sense of something's not quite right. That I do with the Zoom meeting. And I think that has to do with the fact that your brain has accepted the fact that this world's not real.
Yes.
Your friend's not a wizard. you're not running around with a glowing sword, right? It's like, so you've already accepted and jumped over that chasm.
Yeah, there are also more complex things going on in a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been erased from the fidelity is you can't see the micro gestures in a person's face.
Mm-hmm.
They're so indicative and so much a part of communication.
Right.
Yeah, and as the latest VR goggles come online, I think the Vives have eye tracking. So it's really interesting when I'm speaking with an avatar who has an eye tracking headset, because there's just that extra layer. And in fact, in my VR world, which Tivoli spun out of the first high fidelity that Philip Rosedale built, in that world, I had a Dube scan of myself. So I went to Dube. Michael Anderson got me scanned. It took a minute. A week later, I had an avatar of myself, which was a marionette. But I'm wearing my father's, blazer from 1980, and I look like me, pretty much. So I think it's a really fascinating thing when you invite somebody in and you look the way that you do, and of course I could add wings and all of that, but essentially I look like me on any given day. We're starting to blend these worlds, and what an exciting time to be studying and be entering the workforce, and to enter into a world that Don and Rob and I have been in already. My hair's a little gray here, I can't imagine how exciting it is to be 20 or 30 years old and thinking, my God, like these worlds are opening up, and they really are. And we are experiencing right now the crappiest picture on the tiniest little television with the most, inane programming. We haven't even worked out what to put on these devices yet. Gaming was an easy thing for conversion, and VR certainly has been very fortunate that gaming is such a logical transfer into it, but it hasn't replaced keyboard gaming. VR hasn't yet done that. At some point it will, but it won't replace it. It's just going to be, there's the general with the keyboard, and there's the first-person shooter in the field, or whatever it is. But it's an extraordinary time, and I think it's an extraordinary time. Back to your point, Rob, because when we were kids, and I love this about my childhood, and I read a book, I imagined a book. We all read a book and we all imagine the book. When you play a game with a lot of people and you're sharing a world, you're actually sharing it can change, but it's a canonized world. It's something that 10 years after you've played that game, you could meet somebody who also played that game and describe a particular tunnel and a thing that was down at the end of it and all of that. So an entire generation of gamers is entering the workforce and is going to create the next universe, both physically, architecturally, and I already feel the impact of gaming on architecture. I think it raises the stakes of what reality needs and wants to look like, and how fanciful it could be, and how embracing it can be. It's always been that way, but there's two kinds of ways of reacting to virtual and digital worlds in the physical architectural world. It is to build things that are so gray that they disappear, and they are really a backdrop for whatever digital content and experience you want to put on them, or to build something that's so fanciful that when you take off your whatever it is that you're taking off, you're in a world of wonder. And it's the intersection of those two things, how we move from one state to the other, that's absolutely, for me, one of the most interesting things. How do we transition from multiple realities and not be shocked by them, and not feel uncanny valleys?
Right. And I would like to suggest that, actually that uncanny valley, I mean, the uncanny valley of a book, of a printed book, is very large. It's a huge chasm, right? So there's lots to imagine. And I think the question is, what are those spots of imagination, when you're in a digital environment? And, that what we've been describing as a loss of fidelity is also, in a sense, an opening for people to supply imagination, and to supply, a vision in there. And so I think that transition is going to be interesting. I'm going to let you come in, Rob, in just a second. But I just want to remind everyone, we're here talking about new technology in architecture and design. We're having a fantastic discussion, I think, about the relationship between reality and virtuality, right? And what that means for architecture. We are about 20 minutes to the close of this program, and we have quite a few questions from our attendees lined up here. I'd like to take one that seems related to what we were just talking about with Michael. Tim Cozens asks, relating to new graduates entering the A&D professions, what tech skills beyond BIM do you look for as perhaps minimum? What is ideal? So, what are the attitudes to technology that, that those 20 and 30-year-olds sort of, that we need them to have coming into the architecture profession? That seems a good question to take. We'll take that one across the panel really quick, and then I think we'll start taking the questions in at a little bit more rapid clip after that.
Sure. Would you like me to go first?
Yes. Yes, Don, please.
So, BIM is both a set of practical skills and I think also creative skills. And the people who are really good with it have taken a craft and elevated it to an art. And they are very rare and incredibly valuable because they're thinking in a kind of digital modality all the time. But in terms of tech skills in general, mostly what excites us when we're interviewing people is not so much the knowledge of a specific platform, but cross-linking the uses of platforms and getting exciting results out of those, and being able always to think, how can I use this tool and apply it to a problem, as opposed to, let me celebrate this tool and use it for its own sake. And that's when, again, the craftsperson becomes the virtuoso, because they're just doing these amazing things all the time because there's something else going on there, and the technology is just the tool. And we've actually we've just rolled out a new role in our office. On all of our project teams, there will be someone whose job it is to be devoted to and focused on the intersection between computation and whatever it is that project team is doing. And it's as broad a mandate as that. And if they leave out older generations or younger generations, then they're missing the point.
Yeah, I'll pile onto that. I mean, I come from the software world, software engineering and software architecture, different kind of architecture. And the successes that I've seen in my career when you apply software engineering to other verticals, and this applies to architecture as well, is the ability to abstract. So you don't focus on a tool, you don't focus on a specific product or a product line, you focus on the methodology and what's happening behind the pixels. And coming into the field with an understanding of, okay, so I'm driving a Mustang and I understand, like, how to change the oil filters and how to do, like, if you've got some basic idea of what's happening when you turn the ignition and start steering the car, it's going to help you in a new car, right? And your task is to get your job done. Your engineers and your designers and your stylists and your architects. And what you want to do is abstract your knowledge to your profession and point in those areas. And the tools behind the scenes should just become these opaque things to you.
I just couldn't agree more. I mean, honestly, artists have always been inventors of different kinds of technology. They solved as they needed to solve. But technology stripped of meaning or mission is not really at the essence of what any of us are I think are trying to achieve. And it is when you find the true meaning and raison d'être for something that it starts to, your body starts to tingle and transform. And that's what I think is so exciting about these times. We haven't yet invented, and nor do we know how any of these things will impact us. The best we can do is to ground ourselves in some understanding of what the past implications have been, and just hope that we're all doing a good enough job to consider what the future implications will be, and along the way, hopefully make the world, a little bit better and be more beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I think these responses, even though they're in response to a question about sort of, emerging professionals and what skills they need to build, they're all skills that, I mean, that's an attitude we all have to build.
I'd say I'd love to say a lot, because I think it's such a wonderful question for a person who's entering now. How do you prepare? How do you prepare for a world that transforms every 2 years? It's absolutely impossible. You're going to enter school and the world will have changed 3 times by the time that you're out of it, which we all know. That's just true. And I think for me, the best way to prepare for that is sort of, Yuval Harari's point of view that anybody who tells you what the future is a liar, but anybody who tells you that it doesn't look like science fiction is a liar. Unless we blow ourselves up, and we could, the world is going to look like something that we cannot possibly imagine. And I'm not in 50, 60 years, but in 20 or 30. And so to prepare for that is in my opinion, it is to study the fundamentals more than the particulars. It is to understand the arcs of narrative storylines. It's to understand, mythology and how characters act and behave, and look to the past, but don't be bound by it or chained by the past. But it's the only way I know of preparing for the future is to look to the past and to try to recognize not the circle, but the spiral of us repeating and repeating and repeating with just greater and greater technological prowess. So that's a big, wide, philosophically open thing, but I honestly feel it's the truth. Don't think that what you're learning is,
Yeah, I mean, and if we're looking at mythology to look at character, we certainly should be looking at architectural history to look at space. We're going to take a few questions now at a fairly rapid clip. So I'll have the panelists kind of respond one by one. Lightning round, exactly. Whiteboard software. Anybody would like to take that up? How do we, maybe Rob, this is one for you.
Yeah, we're
how can small teams collaborate?
We're looking at all this now. We've been sort of ad hocing whiteboard software to date, and now we have teams internally that are looking at things like Miro and Concept Board, and we're giving them to our internal studios to see how they operate in those environments. And natural selection, there'll be a winner at the top, and that's one we'll invest in. But architects at SOM and architects in general, they're very tactile. So seeing things pinned up on the walls and having studio sessions around those pinups and physically talking about it, that you want to take from either Don or Michael, I forgot who said this, but you don't want to replace those things. You want to augment those things, right? So the ability to do that when you return back to the office, and in addition to that, have a digital way to do it. So you could have, a monitor up on the wall that is next to the pinups that you could use to interact with, which would also help with social distancing done, which was part of the conversation we had earlier. But so we're looking at all those. I don't have a definitive answer for you yet, but give it a week.
Yeah. Don, you mentioned a workflow monitoring tool.
Sure.
Eric Sun asks, is it similar to a Gantt chart that shows how a team is working, making progress? Yeah. What is the tool you're using?
Yeah, actually, it's not a Gantt chart. It came about out of necessity. We were preparing a proposal that was going to be about 350 pages long, and I think 6 different people were all authoring content for it. There was a complex editorial chain, and everything had to parallel process. So it was becoming impossible to understand the state of any of any of this. So all we did was create a very simple, it was just with Excel, which is still one of my favorite tools because it's actually tabula rasa and using conditional formatting and a series of things.
Oh, Don.
It's the best.
Yeah, we could actually make it graphically compelling, so it was fun to watch. So when you finished your task, you click the box, your box changed color, and the person who was the next in the handoff chain, their box lit up. So you could always like, okay, I'm watching out for, green boxes today. And then if I went backwards, I would uncheck it. So it's very easy to do that. And what was cool about it, I would really encourage everyone, to believe in rapidly self-organizing solutions, because a Gantt chart it's a very particular kind of a tool, and I don't think it evolves very well in a natural context where everything is sort of a swirl of activity. When you've got a network of influences all pushing on it, it's much more linear kind of a thing. So allowing that experimentation and build the tool on the fly and rebuild it on the fly was very successful. And the other thing we did with it, which made it work, was we hosted it in a SharePoint environment where everybody could see it in real time. So it was all about dashboarding. And in general, that's probably the topic for a whole other webinar, just to talk about dashboarding and instrumentation of practice.
Yeah. But I was just thinking as you were talking, as with many types of architecture, loose fit sometimes is the best fit. You want that space for growth and for experimentation. Kathleen has a question for you, Michael. She's curious about how do we break down some social inequities when we're designing mixed reality spaces, especially in education. She works as a design educator and a consultant in K through 12 education and STEAM and project-based learning. And so she, how do we bring people in on an equal footing?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because I can give you a real world example of a company which made a major pivot because of this particular question. So thank you so much for it. And I go back to high fidelity. Philip, who was the creator of Second Life, which is still a vast online world and has hundreds of thousands of people in it. For the last 3 or 4 years, after he sold that, and in the last 3 or 4 years, he started to build a virtual reality version of it, basically assembled the whole team and built something extraordinary. I look like me in there. We're all hanging out, 500 people at a party. Thomas Dolby's playing on stage. It's great. But what the reality is that, and I asked him this, and we were hanging out in San Francisco one day. I said, why are you pivoting? And he said, because I will tell you how many people are in VR right now in the world. And we pulled it up on the screen and we saw an active number. And I think on that day, on a Wednesday in San Francisco, worldwide, there were about 5,700 people in VR. Not in many headsets, not headsets, but in VR. And he said, the problem with this is that it hasn't, with VR so far, is that it's an ivory tower. It costs at least $2,500 up until recently to have a PC that's powerful enough to really play, to be in one of those social environments with deep connection and deep, all of these things. And so remarkably, and in answer to your question, he did not abandon the project, but really pivoted and said, we're going to start from the other end, not who can get in because of the technology they have, but let's build a platform that anybody using a cell phone, a tablet, or a computer who has access to the internet and just can get to a URL is going to have high fidelity, high quality, 3-dimensional audio and a positional way of being able to move themselves around a map and interact with other people. And then we'll layer on top of that all of the other goodies and all of the other things, so long as it never forces out that baseline. And that's where the project is right now. And it's only a couple of months old. It's in a beta, but it is an answer to precisely that: is how can you build a world that the whole world can get into? And above and beyond that, how can you do it in a way that, Rob, you understand video games. How can you do it in a way that doesn't shard everybody into 100-person groups, but actually creates one big world? A world where when 300,000 people or 1 million people are watching a concert, they could walk over to anybody there and meet and speak with them. So those are exactly, it's a wonderful question, because the entire future of our you know, of the industry, all of it depends on that. It's no good if only 100,000 people can get in. Millions and billions of people need to be able to get in and interact and exchange. That's the goal.
Yeah. This is like such a fantastic conversation. We are here talking about new technology in architecture and design. Quick next question. Don, this might be one for you. What technologies can manufacturers look to incorporate in support of architects and design? You know, what tech platforms should manufacturers use to communicate sample and support specifications, especially when, you know, vendor relations are going to change, obviously, because of, you know, people being allowed access into offices and so on. So, you know, how do we work with vendors in the new norm?
I think maybe the best answer is just to describe some of the challenges and pain points that we're experiencing right now. And I don't know what the industry will produce. So let's say activities surrounding project management and just a basic communication are reasonably well handled under the current circumstance. You begin to get into more challenges around collaborative sketching, and you know, we couldn't really pass around a physical model to each other and share it, but I could show you a drawing. So when you start to deal with things that really only exist at high fidelity in reality, that becomes a challenge. So for our teams who are involved in construction administration activities are probably having the biggest challenges right now, because it's hard to get to a construction site. They may not even be permitted on a construction site, and that's a fundamental piece of their work. So how can technology build a bridge that will produce enough fidelity so they can observe construction, be of assistance to contractors and so forth? I think that's kind of a big one. I think another challenge, and I mentioned it earlier, is when everyone is working from home, that's a pretty consistent envelope that we're all in. But when some of us are working from home and some of us are in the office, how do we complete that into a single integrated team? That's another kind of.
And those will be there will be a time where your position is mapped both physically in a place and also virtually in a place, and it will correspond and blend both of these worlds. And there's ways of hacking that together right now, but it will become, I think, more and more of an important thing. Where you're having, I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's true. You'll be having a conversation with a sort of ethereal ghost version of a person peripherally who's also walking the site with you.
I think it's also dramatically changed the way offices are designed, but because the social distancing thing will overcome when the infection or when the risk of infection is lower. But there's nothing more maddening than hearing half of a conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you hear somebody talking on a cell phone on a bus, and you're kind of going out of your mind. Imagine sitting in an office where the person to your left and the person to your right are having these things going on.
Michael, in the space industry, we called that remote presence.
Remote presence,
and that was the idea. It was that you were not on the surface of Mars, right? But you have an avatar in the form of a robotic entity that is you, right? So.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. You know, I think it's interesting how some of these things will play out, though. You know, between people who are not from the same sort of work community. So, you know, when we're talking with clients or vendors versus people who are part of the same community, like, you know, coworkers in an office, right? So I think some of those things around, especially questions around security, which, you know, for vendors, you know, that's especially important, right? So they can't enter offices right now because not even when offices permit their own employees to gather together in their physical workspace, they're likely going to limit the ability for outsiders to enter into that space, right? That will be a second step in the return. So I think as we anticipate that, you know, the questions are similar to the questions that are going to come when we do have that remote presence, right? So what is the security impact in terms of somebody you know versus somebody who is a further removed in your network. I'm gonna take just a couple more questions here. We have someone asking, I think this is for you, Michael, if they can get a tour of your virtual office. I'm not sure a tour is possible, but maybe Metropolis can help with previews.
Yeah, but if they have a headset and want to get in touch, I'll make the time, of course. Yeah.
Heather McDonald, and this might be a question for you, Don. How can nature and wellness work in and around VR? So, currently the architecture world, we're so concerned around health, sustainability, things like that. And we're having a conversation about technology, and we can't, keep those things separate, right? They don't live in separate boxes.
Yeah. Well, I think the benefits of a biophilic experience are well established now and no longer under debate. I think VR with sufficient fidelity could probably provide some benefit there, but there are other people here today who are more expert in that. The issue of wellness, and I think also the issue of just health in general, the survey that we're about to launch for our staff is going to be very much intended to help us understand how to improve wellness. And in all of my conversations right now with my clients, what should we be thinking about doing when we go back? And some of the measures that they ask about, I think, are perhaps overshooting the mark, all with the very best of intentions. Because you can't really design a great solution for the current circumstance, because if you're in a big city, even if you have a nice sanitary office, how is anybody supposed to get to work? The risks, the external risks are much greater. So I'm encouraging people to take kind of a balanced approach and think about, things as simple as improved filtration systems and touchless everything, things that will have a long-term benefit just in an ordinary cold and flu season.
Yeah.
I think too, Don, it's, I'm somebody who really loves a phone call because I can pace and I can move and I can, tend the plants or do whatever it is that I'm doing. And I think limiting the amount of time that we actually need to see each other by making the times in which we do more rich is a path to wellness also. Just being mobile, it's hard to sit in front of the screen all day on calls, and it starts for me at around 6 a.m. and it goes all day.
Sure.
Right. I urge everyone also in the audience to think about neurodiversity as an aspect of wellness. We're in our June issue in Metropolis, we're actually highlighting neurodiversity as one of many concepts that we think the workplace needs to really take seriously post-COVID. Virtual experiences, technological experiences can be hugely liberating for people who think in certain ways or work in certain ways. We know that, through studies with people on the autism spectrum, with lots of other things, where a virtual environment might actually be an advantage over a physical environment. So, I think while we accept that all of us want to be in nature and so on and so forth, I think we should also not be sweeping and ableist in those assumptions. Scott asks, can you speak to the benefits and pitfalls of technological tools and virtual presentations, renderings, or VR in the process of client communication?
May I?
I'd love to. Go ahead.
I'd love to jump in on that. I mean, I am somebody who lives with, a marker, a pen, a pencil in hand, and when I am in my pitch mode, it is very much about the tactile piece of paper and the drawing that I'm able to throw across the table and to say, is this what you're thinking about? The studies have been, done, and so many of them that say that when a group of people is discussing an idea, the moment that somebody says, I don't know what everybody's thinking, but I'm sort of seeing this as a triangle. The moment that happens, the efficiency of the conversation is not double, it's like triple or 4 times more efficient, because suddenly everybody's saying, well, okay, but if that's a triangle, then I'm this point of it over here, or I'm that point. So that way of just being able to sketch and be tactile is really, really, really important. I do think, I mean, I'm snapping shots all the time and sharing them to the screen in a Zoom call. It's very useful if I'm the one talking to be able to have my extraordinary team there, so that when I'm across the continent and draw something and snap it and I send it to them and they're doing the mechanics of putting it up there, so I'm not breaking the flow and the eye contact, because each of those little things takes time. But yeah, that's just a piece of it. I so believe in being able to begin something with a piece of paper and a pen, and I love all the other tools as well, or pencil even, but.
I think the challenge that I think it was Scott what was asking about is you answer the question perfectly, because there's that spontaneity, and the answer is evolving in the moment contextually. So I would recommend to people who they should certainly use the tools that Michael just talked about. But if you need to show a deck of slides, make it as short as you possibly can.
Oh, yeah.
Points for every slide you do not show. And the linearity of slide decks is actually really problematic, because it's not a kind of branching natural experience, nor is it particularly, there aren't a lot of openings for conversation. So the platform that we're using right now is challenged that way. But so is sitting in a conference room and showing people a PowerPoint.
We only have time for one more question here. So I think, Rob, we're going to get you in there. We have a question here about, it's a huge grab bag question, but I'm going to let you pick whatever you want from it. What opportunities do you see for artificial intelligence, machine learning, and augmented design workflows? And I think all of those three technologies are kind of getting at the same thing, which is, augmenting decision-making processes in design. So Rob, maybe you want to respond to that, because I think that's a piece we haven't really talked about today, and that would be great for us to address.
Yeah, you're right, that is a grab bag. We've got we're doing a lot of machine learning internally at SOM, actually, to try and rev designs and get the algorithms to sort of understand what it is that is being done. Machine learning and AI in general can always be applied to solid structure objects, right? So you've got templates and patterns that you work from, and then you make adjustments for environmental changes. You make adjustments for budget. You make there are a dozen switches and levers and knobs that you can pull, and the AI can help guide you. I think that you do not want to completely remove the human from the equation. And again, this is speaking as a non-architect, because the human will they'll put the brass knobs on the doors for you and make sure everything is polished and looking just fine. Whereas if you rely on AI and machine learning too much, you can come up with something that just winds up being uniform, which the client may not want. I do talk to friends in the auto industry, and when they apply AI and machine learning and just let it go, we all wind up with the Ford Fiesta. There's an optimal design for like airflow and fuel consumption and what have you, right? And so that's something that should be avoided. But it's absolutely a major component of everything that we're looking at internally, and I'm sure that Dawn and Michael are doing exactly the same thing.
Thank you all so much. I mean, I'm sorry to everybody who hasn't been able to have a question answered today. We did have a lot of questions, but also I think our panelists really took a deep and quite, considered approach to many of the questions here. And I'm glad they've had the time to develop the responses that they did, because I think what I'm at least walking away with is this metaphor of technology is linked to craft, really. And I think, Dawn, you brought this up, but it kind of ties into almost everything, right? There's an approach and a philosophy to technology that we need to take. Just as Rob just said, decision-making processes still need the human touch. We still need to understand the value of experience. Michael is working on that as well. I think that taking that kind of light approach to technology, understanding that we're dealing with a series of basically skills and crafts that we have to develop, but they're based on history, as Michael said. There are things from experiences that we already know that we need to take into this new normal with us in order to make sure that we're not leaving people behind, that we're addressing, that we're not losing fidelity. Again, a great concept that came up during this conversation, and that we're instead creating some kind of new experience that could possibly enrich the lives of many people through the work that we do. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thanks to our panelists today, Rob DeMillo from SOM, Don Weinreich from Ennead Architects, and Michael Beneville from Beneville Studios. This has been phenomenal. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I feel like I've come on a journey today. So thank you for your time, and hope to be in touch with all of you virtually or in real life very soon. And thanks so much for our attendees for joining us. This has been wonderful. Good afternoon.
So long, everyone. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a good
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Terrebonne, the editor-in-chief of Galerie magazine, and I'm thrilled to be here today with my dear friend and such a creative mind, Aline Asmar. She's the principal and founder of Culture and Architecture. Her firm is located in Paris and Beirut, and she does absolutely glamorous, smart, art-filled projects around the world. She came to our attention at Galerie, and we featured her as our point of view just as her renovations of the Hotel de Creole were reopening, and everyone was wowed, absolutely floored by the gorgeous work she did there. And in a very recent issue of Galerie, we showed one of her latest projects, the famed restaurant Le Jules Verne. So Aline, thank you so much for being here with us today from Paris.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I love Galerie, and obviously I love talking to you. It's always been a rich conversation. I love the idea of bridging cultures, and here we are, and the idea of living artfully is exactly what we thrive for here at Culture and Architecture. So it's just great to be able to talk on this very special moment also in the world, where we have to cultivate these conversations more and more.
Exactly. Well, I'd love to talk to you right now about Le Jules Verne. It's an absolutely monumental project. It means so much, you know, to the entire country of France. It's not just a restaurant, it's so much more. It's an important cultural institution. So will you share with us today, you know, how that project got started?
Absolutely, yes. This is an epic adventure. I feel so privileged to be able to be part of this project, and maybe a little bit in the history of the Eiffel Tower. It's the Grande Dame, you know, it's the Iron Lady. So this is what inspired me. The beginning of the project was a very intense competition in the city of Paris, because the Jules Verne restaurant is renovated once every 10 years. It's a law in Paris. So it all started with the first compete, the second compete, and I was part of a big team. The team was with the chef, of course, Frédéric Anton, but it was also with the group Sodexo, who really lifted us up all together. And I really wanted the design, the interior design, to be highly symbolic, to be very evocative of what Paris is, to also reflect the ideas of strong femininity and the weaving connections with the city of Paris, with the urban landscape. So the entire philosophy of the project is based on the idea of just entering argentique photo, a silver photo, you know, from the Silver Age,
Right.
the 1900s. So everything is very sharp, clean lines with black, white, tones of gray, a tribute to the gray sky of Paris, of course, bringing a lot of lightness and light inside the volume of the second floor that is hanging in above 125 meters in the clouds of Paris. So the entire idea was really to weave with the city this strong dialogue. We inserted mirror in every room. I really wanted to reflect the Parisian landscape. I wanted to create a soft heart for this Iron Lady that is so strong in the outside and really soft and light and airy in the inside.
Yes, there really is such a luminous quality to this space and this lightness. And that was quite a contrast from where the restaurant had been before. Is that a part of how people perceive glamour and want to dine at the highest levels now?
Well, I think that to be very honest, firstly, the ceilings are so low. So I couldn't imagine something dark. Actually, the entrance is very dark. It's a dark sky, almost stormy sky, hand painted. It evokes actually the collaboration between Basquiat and Warhol, called Two Frogs and the Eiffel Tower. So there are two Eiffel Towers, and the backdrop of this painting was on the wall. So you enter through this black envelope with an intervention of a fantastic artist that I admire so much, Ingrid Donat. She's the best living bronze artist. And this is amazing. So I invited her to pay tribute to Gustave Eiffel, to pay tribute to the 1900s and to this engineering, this high craft engineering. But then being in the rooms of the restaurant, you really connect with the sky, you really connect with the landscape, and you want to see everything, of course. So turning your back to the view, you have these mirrors that have 2,500 silver leaf put all together by craftsmen. It's all about craftsmanship. It's all about this glow. I think that I don't know how to decorate. I really like to do architecture in the interiors, and it's all about these streamlines, clean lines, but this glow, this glamour that is coming from the reflective materials, from the textures, from the imprint, you know, the big pulleys of the Iron Lady are actually pulling out, driving all the elevators up and down. And the symbol of these pulleys is just great because actually they rotate in once a year. If you count, they do entirely 2.5 times the tour of the world. So also paying tribute to this idea, we designed a very white, I really imagined this sky of the room to be completely white and just to be framed by very spectacular, but yet very simple circles that are illuminating the room. So it's all a play about reflection, simplicity of the lines, and also a little clin d'oeil, a little reminiscence to the 1900 dresses and the alcove that was created, which is an entirely new space. You sit on the table, and if you look up the ceiling, it's like looking under a dress of Jeanne Lanvin. So there was quite the influence of fashion as well, because Paris is about art, about fashion, about culture. And yeah, all of this comes together, and also pays tribute at the end of the day to gastronomy, which is one of the art of living in France. And working with Frédéric Anton, working with the chef, was an incredible experience. It was really like four hands conversation all along, and it was very intimate to go to his kitchen and work on his big tables in the kitchen, and then him coming to my office or going with me even to Vicenza in Italy, where we did some spectacular tabletops, all embedded with little crystals. So it was a real intimate conversation, and I think this is what makes a space highly emotional and very true to the story.
So what kind of feedback, what kind of inspiration was the chef looking for? What was he giving you to this conversation? Because the food is quite spectacular and beautiful too. And of course, the star of the show.
Yes, absolutely. It was a fantastic conversation. First of all, while designing the project and even throughout the competition, because we were one team and we really wanted to, be able to achieve our dream and realize this project. I always had his open book on my table, the book of his recipes and the way that he composes the food, the way that he brings so much meticulous attention to his composition. It's a painterly vision. The taste is incredible. So all of this really influenced the choice of materials, the choice of light, the volumes, the space, and we really have had a very intimate and ongoing conversation about the layout, about the scenario. How do you create a theatrical dramatic entrance? How do you go from black to white with all these lines of gold that actually just shine in the sun? It's not anymore about a color or a material. It's really about the sensation. And how do you prepare the eye, this feast of the eye, to really host the table and the gastronomy on the table? And one of the things that I really love the most with Frédéric is that he's a great listener. And I was also listening to him a lot, but he was really listening to the codes of architecture. He really wanted this freedom of expression to happen between two artists working together. And that is really crystallized, I believe, in the idea of the table, the presentation plate on the table, which is a book that is sculpted with an excerpt of Jules Verne, Voyage Extraordinaire. So imagine a 3-star Michelin chef who has done it all, who has seen it all. He's been, I think, 3 stars for 15 years. And then we arrive together on this project, and we really want this to have a strong meaning, a strong resonance, and to captivate all the ideas that French culture evoke. It's about gastronomy, it's about decorative arts, but it's also about literature, it's also about the Romanesque. And this is how we ended up having this plate, this presentation plate that is a sculpted book. And Jules Verne, the name Le Jules Verne, is chosen by the city of Paris to evoke the Industrial Revolution, because in his novels and in his books, he has spoken so well about this Industrial Revolution, hence the name. So we didn't want to forget that idea. And in my work, I'm very strongly connected to books. It's books and stones everywhere around me. And just to be able to achieve that little dream of being in the heart of the Eiffel Tower and connecting with everyone coming together around literature and beautiful experts, this means the beginning of another conversation when you sit at the table.
Well, I sat at that table with you, and it absolutely blew me away when we had lunch there in January.
Such a great memory of this moment.
It's such a perfect memory. And, talking about Ingrid Donat, and you're walking through this dark hall, and then just you fall into the light, and the whole city opens up for you. And you've gone up in the elevator, that you're high, what a view of Paris looks like, but still it knocks you over with it's sublime. It really, truly is. And then the book brings you back to this quiet moment of reflection, and sort of prepared like a palate, but like also like a brain cleanser to be like, here, be in this moment, which is so beautiful.
Oh yes, thank you for saying that. It's actually a white page. The book is the white page. It's the beginning of the conversation at the table. I really believe that the art of living, it's not just a style or a decor. I think it's an attitude. And in the 18th century, the art of the conversation was something so important. Everybody practiced the art of conversation. So this opens another layer of conversation, and it's an intimate one, and it really grounds you back in the sky of Paris. So yes.
But I think what's also fascinating is that there's such beauty in every element of the food and design there, but it's hard work, both for you and him, because at the end of the day, you're creating a restaurant in the sky. So what are some of those engineering obstacles that you had to overcome during the process?
Well, yes, you're so right. I mean, first of all, it's a monument. It's a historical monument. So everything is very framed by regulations and codes. Then we have to remember that this Eiffel Tower was conceived by Gustave Eiffel to be there 130 years ago for just a year or so for the international exhibition, Exposition Universelle. So it was meant to be dismantled just a little bit later. So imagine it's still standing there 130 years. So you really have to respect the fact that the weight has to be up to a certain standard. There's only a few lifts, actually. There's only one service lift that we had, you know, the access to in order to get to that second floor. So everything had to be fitting in that service lift. And then we did this construction site in a very, very short time frame. It was also part of the scope, part of the task, part of the challenge. So we really had to respect this time frame, and it was 24/7, and especially in a very heated moment in the months of June, July, where it was 40, 45 degrees outside Celsius. So I don't know how to translate this into but it was really hot, so the cables would would just grow, and the lift would stop. So it was just, you know, going back home or to the office, having a shower, just going back to the site. I think we lived there with my team for a few months, but I really would remember this. Every second was magic. I was never blasé, you know, from going up to the Eiffel Tower and being in this context of just rawness and complete strip down, and coming back with layers and layers to build it again. Because we went down to stripping everything entirely. It had to be also renovated engineering wise, and in terms of codes as well, and regulation for the electricity, for the air conditioning. So everything was stripped down to bare minimum with just the pillars of this entire plateau up on 125 meters in the sky. So yeah, there were many constraints, and everybody respected them very well. It was a joint effort from the engineers, ourselves as architects and interior designers, and of course the chef taking all of this into account as well. The kitchen is small, yet he designed it very smartly. The kitchen was completely left up to Frederic. Of course, you know, we assisted and we listened, but he kind of reproduced his kitchen staging at the Précatelan, which is a 3-star restaurant in Paris in so many years, and he's the chef of the Précatelan. So he kind of reproduced this layering of, you know, tasks in the kitchen in this very small space. And it's like a boat, it's like a ship. Every little shelf, every little thickness here and there between a door and a wall is used. So that was really the attention also to detail in terms of functionality and not only aesthetics.
And no fire.
And no fire, so everything is
I mean, that's crazy. These meals are coming out with no fire.
No fire, no fire, and no flame, no romance on the table with a little candle. So we really worked very hard to just reproduce this feeling of natural, you know, glow and living as well in the evening with the lights, because nothing is more beautiful, you know, than the candlelight. And for the chef, it's very, very extreme to be able to officiate over there without, you know, without flame. But this is his creativity and all of his, you know, genius.
Well, it's a magnificent accomplishment, and truly dining there is one of those memorable experiences that one never forgets.
Thank you. I'm happy we made it that Sunday.
To dine in a landmark. Now, another Paris landmark that you've put your mark on is the Hotel de Creole. And what a fantastic project, and a huge, huge undertaking for you. How did that come about? And what are, you know, you put together a pretty amazing team for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a fantastic challenge as well. I'm an architect by degree, and I come from Lebanon. I'm born in Beirut. So I founded my company first in Beirut and then in Paris. And then during the course of time, I was working a lot on residential projects. So the owner of Hotel de Creole was one of my clients, very faithful client, very special lady who has such a vision. She's Saudi, and they're a strong couple with her husband. She has an amazing aesthetic, very bold, very modern, but very respectful of heritage. So it was a long-term relationship before I was working on Hotel de Creole, because they bought Hotel de Creole. And this is how I arrived on the project. I arrived on the project with the very precious support and trust of the owners of the walls. And the owners were so in love with this French heritage, piece of heritage, you know. And this cultural bridging conversation between East and West, I think, is also so rich. So we had this trust together to build this new scenario for the renovation of Hotel de Creole. And of course, this was done with the fantastic hotelier, which is Rosewood Hotels and Resorts. So the Rosewood Group sense of place is also all about, you know, this attention to detail and connecting with the local culture and craftsmanship, you know, to the utmost level of excellence. So all of this coming together, it wasn't that hard to do good. And I really wanted a story that is different in Paris, but also on the international scene. I think hospitality has today, the luxury has more and more this residential vibe, orientation and imprint in every space. I think we really want every room to be unique, every surprise for the guests to be quite joyful and very soulful and reflective of the culture. So I wanted to gather a team of interior designers. I thought that that's great, you know, to have kind of like in Versailles, there are so many layers of architects and decorators who have made Versailles such a galore. And Hotel de Creole is a little Versailles in the heart of Paris. So I really wanted to gather a team of different interior designers, such as Tristan Auer, such as Shahan Minassian, who is also coming from Beirut, and he's a very dear friend, such as Cyril Vergnol, who also comes from the residential field. You know, he was an architect at Pinto for so long. And then, of course, my team at Culture and Architecture, we were also one of the decorators. So that was my second hat. You know, we were one of the interior designers. We designed actually the second floor historical salons and their suites. And it was such a fantastic adventure. But then there was also, you know, an icon that had to appear in this project. And I was obsessed by the idea of working with Karl Lagerfeld. Why not just to link Hotel de Creole with the fashion world, but Karl Lagerfeld was such a creative genius. He was so knowledgeable in so many things, whether it is the history of art, the history of decorative arts, photography, music, literature, and Hotel de Creole was all about this French art de vivre in the 18th century. So that was the most magnificent gift I think I would keep for life, is to also have been able to invite Karl Lagerfeld, to have him on the project, to assist him as his little hand with my team, being his architect of execution for his vision that he designed in the grand apartments of Hotel de Creole. So there's stories everywhere.
Did you know him before, or how did you have him come on to this project? I mean, that's a pretty big feat.
Yes, it was a bit crazy, I think. In Lebanon, we have a saying that says, let's do it and then we'll think about it. So I didn't think that much. Of course, I knew Karl Lagerfeld from his reputation. I didn't know him at all, and I didn't know anyone who would introduce me to him. So that was actually a terrible question that would pop up in contractors meeting and in meetings, you know, with the highest boards. And they would say, you know, I mean, that's fantastic that you want to work with Karl Lagerfeld, but would somebody introduce you? No. Do you know him? No. Then how is it going to happen? And then, you know, I think that sometimes you just have to throw a bottle in the water. I sat down on my desk just here at this corner, and I took a paper and a pen, and I wrote him a very personal letter. And the letter was very short, straight to the point. And it said, because there's no apartment in Paris that exists that would create a conversation between decorative arts, photography, fashion, music, because Hotel de Creole is being renovated and you're the only one who can create such an apartment. Would it be possible to meet and discuss that? This is my phone number. And I signed with my mobile. And I went to buy some books at his library, which is my favorite, one of my favorite places in Paris. And that was my trick. So I went to get yet another book. And then I thought, oh, can I ask someone to just put it, on his desk? And that's what happened. The letter arrived on Mr. Lagerfeld's desk. And luckily, he found it to be at his taste. And he called me the next day. And that was an epic moment.
Wow. That's
Yes.
quite a story. That's really
Yes.
wonderful.
It's a fantastic story, and it says a lot about the man who he was. I have a lot of difficulty speaking about him in the past. I think he's so present in everyday's life, and with his legacy that is immense. But it says so much about his curiosity, about his total commitment to projects that he would really think, he could excel in. And it was all about encounters. So I went to this rendezvous. I had Mr. Lagerfeld on the phone, and he said, "Oh, okay, your letter is very elegant. Nobody does this anymore. I'd like to meet you." I said, "Okay, fantastic. Your schedule is certainly more busy than mine." He said, "Come tomorrow at 8 p.m. So what do you prepare in 24 hours, less than 24 hours, to go see Mr. Lagerfeld? Almost nothing. I just went with my computer, just closed it and went with it. And again, to this fantastic place, the library 7L on Rue de Lille is not very far from my office here, Boulevard Saint-Germain in Paris. And he has a fantastic studio of photography behind, and it's like a cathedral of books, filled with books on, I don't know, maybe 8 meters high ceilings.
Yeah.
So it was an epic moment. I met with Mr. Lagerfeld. I sat next to him. We had a conversation about everything we love. Art, literature, being strangers in Paris, but loving Paris more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hôtel de Creole, of course, this jewel of heritage and French patrimony. And at the time, I was working on a private palace in Riyadh, and the entire inspiration around this palace came from a collection that Karl Lagerfeld designed called Collection Byzance, and it evoked the Orientalist feeling that he took from John Frederick Louis' paintings. So he saw that project. He said, "Show me something that you did." So I was showing him this project, and he was like, "Oh, wow, you're a cute spy." Because I was looking into references from his work in every project that I did. It was a very healthy obsession that actually created a fantastic conversation with him. And this conversation took place for almost 5 years around Hôtel de Creole, and then another 2 for an epic project that we did together, which is the architectures, functional sculptures at the Carpenter's Gallery, which he designed and I developed for him. And yeah, and I think that was one of the last projects that maybe Mr. Lagerfeld did, and a real joy for me. Every second I learned, and I will keep this in my heart forever.
That's fantastic. And you are still keeping busy now and have another Rosewood project that you're working on that's, an equally important global landmark. Can you tell me about, tell us about this project that you're working on now?
Yes, absolutely. I feel so lucky to be working on another property that is so iconic in Europe, and it's Venice. So Venice is a mystery, and Venice is one of the miracles, I think, of urban development, and also a gate to the east and a gate to the west. So it has all these symbols that I really love. And I think that the conversation with the Rosewood hotels just was layering, more and more references and cultural bonding around things that we really believe in. I really believe that the job that we do as interior designers can elevate the soul, can really bring joy to so many, can awaken curiosity, can just, distract us a bit from our phones and our digital life, and just, project us into the moment, into materiality, but with so much poetry. And this is a very rich conversation that I'm having with Rosewood Hotels, and that led me to work now on this amazing property called Palazzo Donna Giovanelli in Venice. Of course, this is also happening with another great story with a young Italian entrepreneur who is who has a bold vision, and who is also thriving for the same mottos and the same values in life. And it was a fantastic encounter with Paolo Barletta, who is the owner of Palazzo Donna Giovanelli, and who called into Rosewood to transform it into a hotel. And here we come as interior designers, but also as art curators, because I really believe that the hospitality of tomorrow is about this holistic feeling. It's about the soulful object that is just coming from a flea market, and the wonderful art piece, and also the layout and the arrangement of the space and the textures, the materials, and so much craftsmanship and love. And I think that's what make projects so special. So this project in Venice is heading towards also excellence of craftsmanship, Venetian lifestyle, the romance. And I read so much before also pitching for that project, and there's so many beautiful writings. Joseph Brodsky's writings calling, the walls of Venice the flesh of time. Philippe Soler's and his dictionary, it's called the Dictionary of Lovers of Venice, with wonderful excerpts and texts from so many visionaries, artists, and writers who lived in Venice. And Venice is about transforming and creating the person you want to be, becoming
Right.
the person you want to be. So it has a lot of sexiness and a lot of romance, and I can't wait for this project to develop. I can't say more, but it's going to be something very unique.
Well, we can't wait, for it to open too. So you're thinking 2022, 23, when will we be able to experience this magic?
I think between 2022 and towards end of 2022 and early 2023 it will be ready. It's gonna be around 50 suites. It's everything has a story. Every room is different. It goes from the neo-Gothic of the 15th century to the renovation of John Battista Meduna in the 19th century. So you have frescoes on the wall, patinas, portraits, old fabrics, moldings, sculptures, statues. All of this needs so much renovation and so much craftsmanship to come back to life. And that's what's really wonderful, is the idea of creating this dialogue between the old and the new, between the heritage and the modern contemporary lifestyle. These are really what I look forward to in every project.
Well, you have such a sensitivity toward it, and it comes through in your designs, which I truly think are poetry and a mix of art and design on a totally different level, different plane. And I'm so thrilled that you could join us today and speak to everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined us. And please don't forget to follow Gallery Magazine on Instagram and like us on Facebook. And Aline and Culture and Architecture, I cannot thank you enough for sharing these very special stories and projects with all of our gallery fans out there today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. It was really a pleasure, and there's nothing that brings me more joy than to imagine that I'm in Paris and you're in New York, and we're creating this, again, cultural bridging conversation that's so rich and so wonderful. And I really feel that more and more it has a strong meaning in the world, just to keep the dialogue and to really believe in what we do and to thrive, each one of us, to do our best and to create beauty, because it's the poetic soul of the world. So I really hope that we made some of your followers and faithful readers dream with us, and also invite them to Paris very soon.
Oh, we're all dreaming with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.